Welcome to this analysis of the short story Rules of the Game by Amy Tan. This short story is taken from Amy Tan's book The Joy Luck Club, which represents the lives of four Chinese immigrant families settled in San Francisco. In this short story, she represents the life of Waverly and also the conflicts that immigrants face, conflicts in relationship as well as conflicts in culture, conflicts in language use among these immigrants. And we find certain autobiographical elements also. This author Amy Tan is very much fascinated with the language, with the English language. She loved the language. She actually wrote many books which are very famous, like Born Setter's Daughters and so on. And most of them represented lives of Chinese people. And about the language use, she was very fascinated with the language, and she grew up in a Chinese immigrant family. She was born to immigrant parents settled in China, in US, and she was ashamed of her mother's broken English. Her mother's English was limited, and she was ashamed of that. And many a times she thought that the imperfect use of her mother's English brought shame to her and to her mother. And this conflict is also represented in this short story, Rules of the Game. We find the same mother-daughter duo in the short story as well. So Amy Tan's mother and Amy Tan, the relationship between these two is represented very effectively in this short story as well. The setting of this short story is San Francisco's Chinatown, and the time frame is Waverly's childhood. When we are introduced to Waverly, she's 8 years old, and the portrayal is about a financially struggling immigrant family living in San Francisco's Chinatown. They live above a bakery, and we are introduced to the neighborhood as this young girl sees it. We are taken to the alley, the restaurant, the Chinese mysterious herb shop, and so on. And we are introduced to her brothers as well, and her mother, and the chess teacher Lopo. So these are the important characters that we find in this short story. The main protagonist of the short story is Waverly, and the antagonist, the one who opposes or is hostile, is her mother. So this mother-daughter duo and their troubled relationship is the main theme that runs throughout this short story. Coming to this woman, Mrs. Zhang, her mother, she's a very strong woman. Though she is not successful in assimilating into the mainstream culture or in the use of English, she possesses this invisible strength, which is seen in her way of educating her daughter through Chinese traditions and proverbs. So there are many instances that we find in the short story which demonstrates that she's very proud. She doesn't want to accept a second-hand incomplete gift, but she's modest as well. She doesn't show that to those people in the Christmas party. She says thank you, but she's not happy with those things. And she's very smart, and she raises her kids above their circumstances. And though she is not comfortable with English, she communicates very well in English through proverbs especially. And she's shrewd and understands how life for an immigrant is difficult, and how difficult it is to adapt to the mainstream society. And also another thing that she is obsessed with is the American rules. And she says it's these rules, and they know all these rules, but they don't tell you. Better you take it and find out all these yourself. and she's a control freak. She likes to control her children, especially her daughter. She's not that concerned about her brothers, but as far as Mimi is concerned, she wants to control her way of behaving, a way of, in every way she wants to control her daughter. And she is a feminist as well, we can say that. She has her own identity, and she's a very strong woman. And Waverly, who is 8 years old, is very clever, and we find her picking up these Christmas gifts, which are very heavy. She disregards the large and hollow gifts, and also she masters chess very fast, and she knows how to manipulate her mother and how to get things done. The concept of reverse psychology that we'll learn towards the end. And she is an individualist. She asserts her own identity, and she succeeds in that. Throughout this short story, we find this conflict between two cultures, American culture and Chinese culture, the conflict between the mother and the daughter. So the American culture represented by the daughter, Waverly, and the Chinese culture represented by the mother. So the narrative discourse is about these two, the conflicts between these two cultures. And as a child living in this Chinatown, she's not mingled into the American society. These Chinese people, when they go and settle in another place, they try to recreate a tiny China in the new place, rather than adapting to the mainstream society. And that's what we see in this Chinatown. But when she moves out of this Chinatown for education, to play chess tournaments, she's introduced into the American society, and finally she wants to accept or assert that American way of life and identity. In the home, they follow Chinese tradition. They eat in traditional Chinese way. And another Chinese or Chinese proverbs and traditions, customs that this Waverly's mother teaches her, is of this invisible strength. And so on, and we'll deal with this invisible strength in detail. So, seeing these American chess for the first time, Waverly is attracted to this new game rather than the usual Chinese things and Chinese mysteries that she used to like and run around this alley to see them. And while playing this new American way of playing chess, though she has adopted that, she follows Chinese rules like this concept of invisible strength and how the strongest wind cannot be seen. But she is modest as opposed to her American opponent, whom she has met in the first local tournament. And the conflict that we see in this short story is of different levels. We find the conflict between two people, the mother and the daughter. We find the conflict between a person and the society. The conflict between Waverly's mother and the society, the mainstream American society. The conflict between a person and his inner feelings. The conflict between Waverly and her own feelings and her own nature. We also find cultural conflict, the conflict between two cultures, the Chinese culture and the American culture. And we also find generation gap as a theme throughout. A mother representing one generation of first generation immigrants, settlers, and Waverly, the second generation, who is ready to assimilate with the mainstream American culture. And also this culture gap is also evident throughout this short story. And we find certain instances where this American culture is adopted by the Waverly family, like they give their children American names and also calculate their age in American way. They celebrate Christmas, go to church, are competitive, wanting to win and chase the American dream. And especially the children, they want to assert their own American identity and so on. But on the other hand, inside the house, they keep their Chinese traditions and customs alive, and they impart the values of self-control, modesty, and respect for elders. Then the Chinese humility, as Mrs. Zhong says, it's luck. And also the customs of eating different types of food, rice, soup, and how it is eaten in a bowl. And also they live in that small Chinatown, shop in Chinese stores, go to Chinese restaurants, and shop from Chinese bakery. They go to the Chinese library, and also they know how to calculate their age by the Chinese calendar, the children. And also they believe in magical charms and other superstitions. And as the story moves forward, and as she becomes a chess champion, we find the conflicts raising between Waverly and her mother. And her mother, right from the beginning, gave many advices and certain proverbs to imbibe values in her daughter. But now Waverly started resenting those advice and the way her mother controls her and shows off to others, and we find certain instances where she is very much annoyed. At one point of time, she just ran away from her mother while she was shopping in a market, and ran for so long. But at the end of the day, end of the alley, she found no way to go, and she came back to her house, to her mother. But her mother, on the other hand, was very stubborn and refused to accept, and she just went to the bed and was focusing on just the game of chess, and which later on became a metaphor of her own life. And another concept that is dealt in detail is the invisible strength, the art of invisible strength. And also there is another phrase that is being repeated over and over, that is, the strongest wind cannot be seen. And in chess competitions, this guides her, this invisible strength, and the concept of the strongest wind, which is invisible, but it is strong. And throughout, she finds her mind, which she cannot see, but is very strong. And she believed in that invisible strength, which is the female power, according to Annie Tan, which denied conventional paths and the customs, especially Chinese customs, and she's ready to reject all those traditions to follow the American dream. And as foreigners in that land, that is a power which her mother always boasted of having, because though she uses limited English, she communicates very fluently and effectively through the proverbs and certain phrases and proverbs especially. And also, Zhong, who is ashamed of her mother's English, she actually accepts these proverbs and the advice that her mother gives her. I knew it was a mistake to say anything more, but I heard my voice speaking, "Why do you have to use me to show off?" So this is another instance of conflict between the mother and the daughter. So throughout we find her accepting the advice and being submissive to her mother. But at one point of time, she just started protesting and ran away. And this is something against her own culture, her own Chinese culture. And her mother is seen as an opponent whom she has to fight to assert her identity. And the rules of the game, as the title suggests, as the story progresses, she learns a set of rules to follow in chess competitions. But at the same time, these rules are applicable to her own life as well. The game of chess acts as a metaphor for her own life. So these are certain rules that she has imbibed to be a chess champion, but at the same time, champion of her own life, her own mind, her own nature. One is self-control. Then the second one, and that is, this is the advice that her mother used to give: bite back your tongue. So if you want something, and if you want to fight, if you want to scream, just bite back your tongue, so that you want, so that you can control yourself. Hiding your desires, strong as wind, cannot be seen. Then withholding knowledge. A little knowledge withheld is a great advantage, not only in chess competitions, but also in life. And fourth one is foresight in life and also in this game of chess. Fifth one is planning. The one who plays better has the clearest plans for both attacking and getting out of traps, and that is applicable in her personal life as well. And another interesting concept is reverse psychology. She wanted to play in the tournament when somebody suggested that she should participate in local tournaments, but she doubted that her mother won't allow her to play among strangers. And she makes this comment: I knew she would not let me play among strangers. So she said this in advance, that she don't want to play because they would have American rules, because she knew that her mother resents American rules. And if I lost, I would bring shame on my family. That is also another important factor. Her parents, especially her mother, is very proud of her family and tradition, and she won't take this shame. But on the contrary, so hearing this, her mother says, "It's shame, you fall down, nobody push you," said my mother. So if you fall down without anybody pushing you, then it's your responsibility, and that is shameful. And then she adds, if you fail or if you win, that is your responsibility. Next, she says, it's about outsmarting your opponent. How to outsmart your enemies, not only in the chess competitions but in real life, and about pausing and pretending, which she does very effectively. And we find one example when she was being photographed. And this reverse psychology is again we find instances, various instances, and throughout this short story. And also certain chess etiquettes like politeness, good manners, how to keep those pawns in neat rows. And all these manners are applicable in real life for Waverly. And then how to remain modest while announcing check, and also to accept failure as well as success with modesty and grace. Her mother again and again repeats this. So if you win, that's your responsibility. If you lose, that's your responsibility as well. So these are 12 main points that we come across, or certain rules that she has learned, which is applicable to her own personal life as well. I hope this short story is pretty clear to you, and I want all of you to go through that video summary, this analysis, as well as read the short story from the text. And if you find any difficulty and if you want any clarifications, you can message me. Thank you. Have a good day.